expressed on the Final Straw Radio do not necessarily reflect those of Asheville FM, Friends of Community Radio, or any of the affiliate radio stations airing the show. You're listening to WSFM-LP 103.3 in Asheville, North Carolina. This is The Final Straw, and I'm Brissa Goodness. This show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you're interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment, you're free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw, care of Asheville FM, 864 Haywood Road, Asheville, North Carolina, 28806. The show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop. This week, I spoke with Whitney about the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and the Mountain Valley Pipeline, two pipelines flowing through the mid-Appalachian and the mid-Atlantic region on Turtle Island, and both connecting to the Transco pipeline in Pennsylvania County, Virginia. The pipelines are 48 inches in diameter and are made for transporting dangerous, compressed, and pressurized natural gas through many watersheds, towns, and farmlands. In addition to fears of contamination of waterways and soil through possible leaks and explosions, many people are concerned the pipeline will be carrying gas for export, not even for domestic consumption, and thus increasing the worldwide carbon footprint of the U.S. Whitney is also involved in an upcoming podcast series to inform folks in Virginia about the history and aspects of the pipelines to be released in the run-up to the decision by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission on whether or not these projects can move forward. We'll announce more about the podcast at the end of this interview. Other regional upcoming events related to the ACP and MVP pipelines listeners may consider attending include the following. Beyond Extreme Energy will be putting on a convergence in Washington, D.C., April 26th to the 28th, and there's a plan for a huge march that includes that group on the 29th in D.C. BXC was a co-sponsor of the Walk Across NC area of North Carolina areas that may be affected by the proposed Mountain Valley Pipeline. More info on the conference and other stuff that BXC is working on can be found at beyondextremeenergy.org. Delaware River Keepers have compiled people's dossiers on shortcomings of studies in the economic and environmental harms of the ACP and MVP if they were actually passed, as compiled by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. You can find more of that at delawareriverkeeper.org. Another site of interest we're checking out is APPPL.org for the Alliance of People to Protect the Places We Live, another co-sponsor of the Walk Across North Carolina. Separately, if you're in the Southeast or wherever, you are cordially invited to attend the first Another Carolina Anarchist Book Fair, also known as the ACAB 2017, from May 5th to May 7th in Asheville, North Carolina. The weekend of events kicks off with a welcome table at Firestorm at 610 Haywood Road from 3 p.m. until about 6 p.m., with a schedule of events and pamphlets about how to plug in. There are multiple musical events Friday and Saturday nights. Featured speakers include Sean McFessel, who we interviewed recently about how nonviolence ain't what it used to be. Jude Ortiz of the Tilted Scales Collective, who we also interviewed recently about a tilted guide towards being a defendant. Also members of the Crime Think Collective, as well as people from the Water Protectors Anti-Repression Crew, and a special appearance by author and activist Ward Churchill. Vendors over the weekend will include PM Press, AK Press, Little Black Cart, Strangers in a Tangled Wilderness, Combustion Books, and many, many more. Consider the daytime events to be all ages. You can check out a schedule and all sorts of other info at acab2017.noblogs.org for updates and information.
What you say, what you say, what you say, what? We're caught like a bomb!
In case you haven't heard, the U.S. bombed a Syrian airfield with 59 missiles. This happened, according to Trump, as a consequence of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad using chemical weapons against his own people. These events have gotten a lot of coverage as media attempt to anticipate the implications, especially given that Russia supports the Assad regime in Syria. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has promised to confront Russia about the removal of Syrian chemical weapons while Ambassador to the UN Nikki Haley has indicated that the U.S. goal may be regime change in Syria. Personally, I think all of this is distraction. Let's not forget that a much bigger story is how the Russian government influenced the U.S. election to get Trump elected in the first place, a story that has now taken a backseat to the current conflict, a conflict that, at least on the surface, would appear to chill relations between the U.S. and Russia, and would also appear to signal that Trump is not a puppet of the Russians. So let's take a closer look at events, because I would suggest that we're missing what's really going down. Assad has used chemical weapons on his own people over and over again, somewhat routinely. This is nothing new, and Trump, as a candidate, indicated that Syria is not the U.S.'s problem. He made clear his complete opposition to interfering in Syria. After the latest chemical attack, this same Trump, who was totally opposed to intervening in Syria, has declared that this chemical attack, which was mild compared to previous chemical attacks, somehow changed his mind. Suddenly, Trump cares about dead kids. Of course, if Trump had not blocked the evacuation of refugees, those same kids killed by chemical weapons might have been welcomed right here in the U.S. with blankets and bowls of soup. But now he cares about those dead kids, or so it seems. So, with a newfound concern for Syrian children and chemical weapons that he never showed before, Donald Trump ordered 59 missiles launched at a Syrian airfield. We're told that this airfield was one used to launch the offensive chemical attack. That may be true or not. We have no way to know. Also, before bombing the airfield, which may or may not have been the one that launched the chemical attack, Trump admits that he notified the Russians of the impending missile launch. Reasonably, the Russians, who are friendly with the Assad regime, likely called Assad before the missiles fell. We can assume that they scrambled everything of value from the area, if there was anything of value there in the first place. This is supported by the Russian news footage the following day that showed 5 Syrian planes untouched sitting at that base. It's also reported that flights from that airfield resumed the following day. Confronted with this information, Trump tweeted that you never bomb actual runways because they are so easy to repair. So check it out. Here's what I think went down. Trump, Putin, and Assad were playing Naked Twister at Trump's Florida hangout, smoking opium out of a hookah. Trump voiced his concern that his subservience to Putin was soon going to be exposed by the media. So Putin suggested that Assad kill some kids, give Trump an excuse to pound his shoe on the podium. Then, according to the plan, Trump would launch millions of dollars in missiles into an open field and blow up some junk. As a consequence, everyone would be distracted away from the cozy relationship between the 3 world leaders, sprawled all over the twister board with their heads up each other's butts. I don't know, maybe I'm too cynical, but I would suggest that Trump, Putin, and Assad, even as I speak, are back down in Florida smoking opium from a hookah, naked, slathered in baby oil on that twister board. In reality, nothing changed. What we're watching is the global political equivalent of professional wrestlers flexing and screaming at each other. It would only appear that Trump smacked Assad with a chair and that Putin is climbing up the turnbuckle. In reality, the 3 of them have dinner plans when the match is over. And those dinner plans ought to be the real story, but they're not, because we're busy staring at an empty field in Syria, where millions of dollars in U.S. missiles did nothing at all, and the Trump-apocalypse is progressing right on schedule. This is anarchist prisoner Sean Swain from War and Corruption in Lebanon, Ohio. If you're listening, you are the resistance.
You can write to Sean Swain at Sean Swain 243-205, Warren CI, P.O. Box 120, 5787 State Route 63, Lebanon, Ohio 45036. Updates on his situation and more writings by Sean can be found at seanswain.org.
We're speaking with Whitney about resistance to the announced Mountain Valley Pipeline and the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, the MVP and ACP respectively. Thanks a lot for chatting with me on such short notice.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Definitely. Firstly, can you tell listeners about these two projects? What is the proposed Mountain Valley Pipeline? Where's it supposed to run? What's it supposed to carry? And why are folks so concerned about it?
Right. So Mountain Valley Pipeline is a 42-inch high-pressure natural gas pipeline. A lot of folks who are opposed to it choose to call it fracked gas pipeline because that's what it is. It's taking gas that has been fracked in the Marcellus Shale in West Virginia, and it's taking it through some very steep slopes over the mountains in West Virginia into Virginia, and I believe it's terminating, I think in Pennsylvania County, but it's terminating at the Transco line, which is a pipeline that runs north-south and carries natural gas. And the Transco line actually now can run, can carry gas in both directions.
And what's the concerns that you're aware of in terms of why would people be concerned about having this sort of project running over steep grades and over such like varied land lines and around people with like the compression and such?
Yeah. Well, what I've heard from a lot of people out in the counties is that, like, when they first heard about it, some of them thought, oh, well, this will be good. This is, like, we need natural gas in this area. And they actually thought, yeah, this might bring jobs. But then they started finding out that this was not for public use. This is a pipeline that was to transmit natural gas at a very high pressure, and there's so many risks to that. One, just being, if you're a landowner and this pipeline is coming through your, very, very close to your home, which it is in so many instances, you're in a blast zone, and people have been paying attention to pipelines in the last several years, and they know how dangerous pipelines have become, even, the new ones that are being built. But in addition to that, this type of pipeline, this size and pressure of a pipeline like this has never been built over this sort of terrain. This is going up very steep, angled slopes. A lot of these areas are very prone to flooding, not just on the Mountain Valley Pipeline, but also the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which is also being proposed at the same time. And I've been speaking with folks lately, and they, take me on a tour of their property, and they show where trees are being uprooted all the time in the valleys, because these are wetland areas, and creeks flood all the time, and they're very, very concerned about just the local geography, the local weather patterns, and the erosion that they've already been seeing happening near their homes. And of course, then there's just the issue of water, as always. A lot of these areas are the headwater regions, and the Mountain Valley Pipeline is going to be crossing, I think, 140-something different creek crossings. I might have that number wrong, but it's a lot. It's over 100, and that means that it's going to be very risky to people's water supply. So that's, like, in a nutshell, that's why they're concerned.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can you talk about the people that are threatened to be impacted living in these communities that, for the length of the MVP? Are there any like specific industries that run through there or demographics? Like, I know I talked to someone a month and a half ago probably about the Sable Trail pipeline, and they were talking about the distinctive realities of environmental racism impacts, mostly like poor. When we can also address this specifically for the ACP afterwards, but with the MVP, with the Sable Trail, it was about like poor communities of color in a lot of cases being specifically impacted, or just poor communities in general.
Well, what you've got Mountain Valley Pipeline is, it's going through a lot of farmland. A lot of people, it's not just their homes, but it's like their home and their land is their livelihood. So, for instance, there's a woman in Franklin County who operates a farm, and like her whole family helps run the farm, and it's an organic farm, and so yeah, I mean, I can't really speak a whole lot to like the demographics of like the Mountain Valley Pipeline. I just know that it's a lot of rural country, a lot of people who have lived there for a really long time, for generations, and some communities that are very tight knit. And Bent Mountain, for instance, is one that just recently spoke to some folks there, and you know, it's encouraging to hear that like they're really closely connected now over this pipeline, whereas they might not have. I've heard from some people that they weren't, that this has brought them closer together. As for like the ACP, for instance, I think it's a similar thing to the Sable Trail. I know that, yeah, like the compressor stations, as we see with a lot of these projects all the time, these companies, Dominion is the one that's proposing the ACP. And one of the things that they do, of course, is they look at a map and they say, well, let's let the places that they choose to put some of the worst infrastructure, the most risky infrastructure, like a compressor station. For the ACP, the compressor station is proposed for Buckingham County, and it's a community of mostly elderly, Black community, many who have lived there for years and are, their ancestors started that community after the Civil War. This is like a freed slave community, and there's a couple of historic Black churches there that are within like a mile of the proposed compressor station. And I think it's a sensitive issue, though, because, a lot of the people in that area don't want to necessarily call attention to that as a reason for this, like this is wrong, but I don't know really how to say it. It's just a little bit sensitive, but it's the same pattern that we see happening all the time. That, environmental racism is a real thing, and yeah, it's real.
Yeah, it makes sense that government and capital, as much as they can be separated, pick the cheapest route through the most disenfranchised communities, because they feel that those communities don't have the political clout to be able to stop it.
Yeah, well, and it's very interesting in Buckingham too, is a case where Buckingham County doesn't have a dedicated media outlet for their county. And I mean, if I was a pipeline company and I was looking at, placing these things somewhere, I would go, Buckingham is prime. Let's put it there, because they're going to have trouble getting the media out, because they know that that's what creates like the opposition. That's what gives the opposition power, is getting your story out there. So Buckingham doesn't have a dedicated media outlet. It's been very difficult for them to get media coverage. They're getting strong. They're strong, though. They're a strong community, and they're organized, and they're also up against a board of supervisors that is, being swayed by this idea that they're going to get tax money from Dominion for this project. They also have one of their board of supervisor members works for Dominion, so there's also that. Yeah, that's kind of complicated.
That's a repeated narrative, I think, in a lot of places that are used to extractive industries. It's like, oh, well, we don't have a lot of highly profitable industry coming through here, so what can we sell that'll bring in some cash for the local government or whatever? I'd like to get back to the topic of media projects, but can you say a little bit about the proposed route for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline?
Yeah, Atlantic Coast Pipeline. So the Atlantic Coast Pipeline is, I think, a 500-mile long pipeline. It's starting also in West Virginia. It'll go through West Virginia, Central Virginia, and its terminus is in Robeson County, Lumberton, North Carolina. I believe there's also an extension that would come off of the ACP that would go to Hampton Roads as well. ACP was It's like Mountain Valley. It's a 42-inch pipeline. Initially, the announcement for the ACP came out just a couple months before the Mountain Valley pipeline. So both of these projects are, being considered at the same time by two separate companies, but they sort of mimic each other in ways, in purpose. Both of their terminuses are that same Transco line, which is, one of the reasons why a lot of people who are fighting these projects keep saying it's pretty obvious what you want to do here is export this gas, or at least have the option to export this gas and make as much of a profit off of it as you can, because obviously we live in a capitalist system, and that's your motive. But of course, the companies both continue to say that this is about public use, and the spokespeople say, oh, we want people to be able to have natural gas access, and but the opposition doesn't believe it. I don't believe it either.
What are people in these areas powering their houses with if they're not using natural gas? Just electricity from coal-fired plants, or?
I don't know if I could answer that exactly. Virginia has been shutting down coal. A lot of the coal-fired plants in Virginia have been closing. Dominion has been closing a lot of those, converting them to natural gas. Yeah, I think we're already using natural gas, and one of the things that I've heard other people say, and people that would be much more well-read on this than myself, but there is no need for these pipelines that we already are meeting. Our natural gas needs are already being met, and companies like Dominion have looked ahead into the future and say that they're projecting that we're going to need so much more natural gas, but those projections have been called into question by experts. So I think we're already using it.
Yeah. If the industry is meeting the needs for national consumption or domestic consumption, do you know where the demand is coming from for this natural gas? It's fine if you don't know, but it might be speculation at this point.
Yeah, it's probably what I speculate, what I've sort of been saying for the last couple of years. I think the companies are creating the demand. Dominion's the one who's building new natural gas power plants, the Greenville station, and I can't remember the others, but they're the ones building these new plants. They're the ones converting the terminals to export natural gas, such as up in Cove Point, Maryland. I think to me it's as if they're creating the need to serve their own interests. I'm sure that if you spoke to anyone in the industry, they would say that's not true. But we've just been hearing otherwise from a lot of people who have been studying this closely.
And one more thing, you had mentioned compressor stations. What's the significance of a compressor station? How does it function within a pipeline system, and what are the dangers posed by them?
Yeah, in a nutshell, the compressor station is the heart of a pipeline, literally, because basically you need a compressor station every, I don't know if it's 50, 70, certain amount of mileage. It's going to vary depending on the terrain and so forth, but a compressor station sort of boosts the gas to get to its next point. And these are large facilities, noisy, require a lot of land, and emit an obscene amount of pollution into the air. And there have been tons of studies documented of people having adverse health effects from compressor stations. The list is pretty significant, but just the volatile compounds that are released, the particles, the smaller the particles that are emitted, the worse it is, because it can get down into the bloodstream and into your lungs. And it's then, of course, when you compound the fact that they put a lot of these things in communities that are rural, that are lower economic communities, elderly people who already are prone to, they're the ones that are most vulnerable to those health impacts, and it's just a recipe for disaster for any community. And on top of that, one thing that I've heard a lot of people bring up is the fact that if you're in a rural community, the industry's standards for safety are actually lower than they are for a highly populated area, because they rate the risk level in terms of population. So if you're in a low population area, the shutoff valves are, like maybe 10 or 20 miles farther apart than they would be for an urban area like, Richmond, Virginia. And the pipe thickness is also thinner as well. So like the wall of the pipeline is thinner. And this has a lot of people really angry, because they're like, well, we live here. We live here in this community. You're making this, our lives are not any less valuable than the lives of people in a city just because there are less of us. It's absurd.
Yeah, that's a really dark mathematics to be considering right there.
Yeah.
You're listening to WSFM-LP 103.3 in Asheville, North Carolina. This is The Final Straw, and I'm Bursa Goodness. Can you speak to what recent resistance has been seen against these pipeline projects, and how far these are out on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, for instance, right now, just a few days ago, where they're at in the process in terms of, commenting with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and so forth, they just ended the comment period for the ACP on the draft environmental impact statement. So people have been sending in their comments to FERC on that, which is, that's important to do. It's important for them to have that record that, like, we've tried to go through all these steps, and they have. Like, communities on both of these pipelines have been showing up for it's been like 2.5 years now for pretty much both of them that people have been fighting this. They've been showing up to their local board of supervisor meetings. They've been going to FERC, so from the local to the federal level, they've been trying to engage in this process in the way that the process says that you are supposed to. But at the same time, they've been, doing actions. They've been organizing. And, lately, I think as we get like closer to these decisions that are being made, it's sort of, there's less of, I've seen less of the, focusing on politicians like the governor. People were doing that for a really long time, but have kind of seen that that hasn't really gotten them anywhere. So, they're taking more escalated action. There was this past summer an action at the governor's mansion where a few people, I forget how many it was, maybe 10 or so, risked arrest at the governor's mansion. And then, of course, you've had people that have been doing walks along the route to, like, raise awareness about it, reaching out to the media. And, in terms of the timeline, we're still kind of in this middle ground, this middle of the process now, where I think the decisions that are to be made by FERC are still kind of maybe 6 months out, like end of the summer is what we've been hearing. So I might be doing the math wrong, but I think right now they're projecting that FERC would be making those decisions late summer. And if they approve these permits for the pipelines, they probably would begin construction in like mid or late fall, like maybe November-ish is what I've seen. But, like the strategy that we've heard is, like delaying these is that's what we can do. That's what we can do right now. And there have already been delays along the way. There are court cases that people are looking forward to as well. I've heard some people say that they think that actually could be a significant way to fight these, alongside other things that could happen at the same time.
you mentioned media, just to kind of jump back. You mentioned media and getting people's voices and stories out there, and in places, rural places in particular, where independent media, if it ever existed, has gone away because just the market forces have pushed for people to get their news from more centralized corporate infrastructure. Those are my words, not your words. But but in areas where people have to be tight knit and they get news from each other, or they get news from USA Today or from New York Times or the internet or ABC or whatever. That seems to lead to like this big dearth of communication and conversation. And critical engagement, especially on the local level. And you're involved in a really interesting media project about the MVP and ACP, or about pipelines in general. Can you tell listeners a little bit about what you're working on?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking me about that. Yeah, I'm here in Richmond. The pipeline, obviously, neither of these pipelines are coming close to Richmond, but a small group of us here were interested in doing a podcast about the pipelines in Virginia. So we kind of just started that. We don't have a name for it yet. Maybe we can come up with that soon. We're going to come up with a name very soon. The idea is that, like I said before, the fights against the pipelines, both of them have been going on for 2.5, almost 3 years now. And a lot of people, when you say the word pipeline, they now, because of things like Standing Rock that have gotten so much national attention, their ears perk up when you say pipeline. And not everyone has necessarily been paying attention to the pipelines the fights that have been happening here in Virginia. So the idea is to get people up to speed on what's already happened in the last 3 years, and get people's stories, get the voices of the people in the front lines who have been up against this for the last 3 years, and then, get that emotional connection to the fights. And then eventually what we want to do is be able to report on what's happening on the ground in real time. So we're just starting out, and we're really excited about it.
What made you decide to work through the podcast medium? Like what positives do you see over like print or running a website or something else?
Well, I'm a video editor. I've been a video editor for the last 10 years now. And, there's been a lot of documentation over the years from really good documentaries that have been made about these pipelines. I kind of saw it recently as, this stuff is such a moving target. It's moving new information all the time. Routes are being changed all the time. And it's hard to keep up with. And it's a lot of information. There's so many different angles to this fight. There's the environmental angle, there's the economic impact angle, the larger energy economic angle. There's, compressor stations alone, eminent domain. There's so many different levels and reasons to be opposed to these projects. And it's a lot to keep up with. It's a lot to cover all in one go. So I don't know. We just sort of realized that this could be a great way to reach a wider audience. Streaming media these days is just so much more accessible. If you hear something on the radio and you can then go and catch up on episodes later on, I think it's a way to reach more people. And I think there's sometimes also this thing with audio where it almost seems counterintuitive, but you're listening and your mind is filling in the other information, the visual information that you're not seeing, that you're just hearing. And sometimes I think it's sometimes more impactful or more powerful, as a listener or as an audience member. It can feel more immediate, maybe. So,
and probably a way less production than video.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I'm an editor, and so I don't go out and shoot video, for projects. I get the footage comes to me, and usually it looks really good, but it's so much easier. It's so much more simple. It's not easy still. I mean, you have to have good audio. But yeah, it takes that out of the picture.
I guess I saw really, just in passing, I saw that in as far as like the legislative non-direct action side of things, that Trump is in the process of appointing new folks to FERC. And so some of the nonprofits are trying to focus on applying pressure to get the administration to deny or get other politicians to block certain appointees that I would imagine are just shills for industry. But,
yeah, probably.
Well, is there anything that we didn't touch on that you want to get out to the listeners from this conversation?
I don't know. The only thing, the thing that I would say from my own perspective, someone living in the city, and not directly affected by these projects, I tend to underestimate. I think I tend to underestimate, what people are willing to do. That the folks who are directly impacted. I think a lot of times, it makes sense to a certain degree to to sort of, you have to go through the process that they give you, and I can understand that from a certain aspect. But I do think we underestimate, we meaning myself and sometimes people that I work with, their readiness and willingness to do what it takes to stop these pipelines, and I find that exciting.
Yeah, it's definitely inspiring. I mean, I also live in a city, and I'm surrounded by, there's beautiful nature around me, but I'm not living my day-to-day. I'm living my day-to-day in a very alienated sense to the earth. Like I can walk in there or whatever, but I'm not growing food. I don't live in a rural place where I have to have a very, very deep relationship with the animals that are around me, the plants that are around me, the other people that are sharing that same space. Are there any specific examples, anonymized if you want to, of folks engaging in directly like defending the land that they live with that inspire you?
Well, I mean, no examples yet, but I think I just think that, I think that people have a fierce, innate desire, I don't know if that's the right word, to protect their homes. I think we hear a lot of talk about land ownership, and it's something that I often struggle with because, we've seen what's happened at Standing Rock, and I think a lot of people are starting who didn't necessarily connect the issue, this generations long issue of land being stolen, that are starting to see that it's coming full circle. And I think we have a really great opportunity to finally make that connection with people. And, because I hear a lot of people say, like, I just can't imagine this happening. This could never happen in this country. And I think slowly that is people are starting to see that, like, well, this actually makes sense that this is happening, but we can fight it now, and we should.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like this is the last like 7 or 8 years that I've been aware of in terms of anti-pipeline resistance, in particular, like with the Keystone XL, and other things in like the Great Plains and Southwest of the U.S. It's been astounding to see like alliances of indigenous folks and like small ranchers and farmers and just people that live in communities coming together, like not just in spite of their difference, but also partially like just drawn together by that shared need to defend the place that they live and the desire to not be feeding their kids poisoned water or whatever. Yeah, it's seeds for resistance for sure.
Yeah. There's actually there's that seeds of resistance is a phrase that's been used for. There's his name is Mikasi, and he's been out at Standing Rock and fought on the Keystone XL pipeline, and he brought some sacred Ponca corn to Virginia to share with the people who are fighting the pipelines here, and they planted it this past year and harvested it, and it was really moving, and it was a beautiful story. I mean, probably don't have time to put it out there now, but yeah, he calls them seeds of resistance. They've been in the sacred Ponca corn that is now federally protected, and been planted in South America in places where they're fighting fossil fuel infrastructure down there. And I sometimes still see people kind of glossing over that historical aspect of like white supremacy and, you know, the calling on the forefathers of the nation, you know, in terms of this, you know, eminent domain, property rights, this could never happen here. I would love to see those connections being made stronger in terms of like, this is coming full circle, and we can embrace that. And actually our resistance will be stronger if we embrace that, you know?
Yeah. And it'll mean changes, and it'll mean people who are used to certain privileges giving up those privileges, but those privileges are frequently held in place by enslavement and really unhealthy relationships with our community and our world. Yeah. We actually do have time for that story if you have time. if you want to go into more detail, but if not, I interviewed Mikasi. When was it? When they did the harvesting? It was this past June, I think. No, that doesn't make sense. It was in October. It was in October that they did the harvesting of the Ponca corn. And in a nutshell, I mean, it's always better to hear this from the person who knows the story the best. But basically, during the Keystone XL fight, you know, there was like what they called the Cowboy Indian Alliance, and that, as I understand it, grew out of one significant thing that happened was, you know, you had ranchers and farmers along the route of the Keystone XL. One of them was named Art Tanderup, and the land that his farm is on now is part of the Ponca Trail of Tears, and this man named Mikasi is a member of the Ponca tribe. They ended up finding a corn that had been that they thought had been lost. It was a sacred Ponca corn that they had planted and never got to harvest because they were pushed off of their land in the late 1800s, and they thought the Ponca corn was lost. And somehow they ended up finding some of it. I forget exactly the details of where they found it, or, you know, someone had saved it somehow. And that corn was then, at the time of the Keystone XL fight, was then planted and, you know, given to the farmers along the route. And they planted it, and they weren't sure if it would grow, but it did. And then they planted more. And I think this was in Oklahoma, they had to, you know, the farmers, the ranchers, the farmers have to register, they have to report what they're growing on their farm to the state. And this farmer who had planted the Ponca corn with Mikasi and with, you know, so many other people,
he went to the state to register and report what he was growing, and the state didn't recognize it. They said, we don't know what that is. We don't have a record of that anywhere. And they ended up having to go to the federal government, and they had it federally registered as Ponca sacred corn, and it is now a federally protected crop. It is a federally protected corn. So, that's got some implications, that we may or may not agree with in terms of the government saying that something is protected, it should be protected anyway, right? But it was a very powerful story. It was funny because when they were going to plant the corn, when Mikasi, and these were some of the folks from the Bold Alliance who had been fighting the Keystone XL, of course, and had that amazing victory. And when they were coming to Virginia and bringing the corn with them to plant, I remember kind of reading about it, but not realizing the power of the story. And that was I was so moved when I finally heard the significance of that. And I think it could have some really, powerful implications for resistance. And Mikasi said someone started calling it the seeds of resistance for that reason. Planting corn in the route of a pipeline is symbolic in a certain way, but at a certain point, it becomes more than symbolic, if the timing is right.
Yeah, and I guess that if the corn can grow up in the pathway of the pipeline, that should be a good example for us that we need to stand and resist these things too. Mm-hmm. It's like a product of the earth. Where can folks find that interview? Is that up anywhere?
We're hopefully going to be featuring that in an episode of our
cool.
podcast, our yet to be named podcast. So hopefully, hopefully it will be, it'll be available for people to hear.
Yeah, that's an awesome future. Little preview trailer you just gave me. That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, not to reveal any more of y'all's secrets. Thank you so much, Whitney, for taking the time to chat. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
I am surrounded on all four sides. I surrender to the burning sun, to the liquid moon, to the western wind, to the mother.
As of now, there is no website address for our guests' podcast, but we were sent their mission statement a few days ago, and it is as follows. End of the Line is a pre-recorded podcast created by local Richmonders following the developing story of two proposed pipelines in Virginia, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and the Mountain Valley Pipeline. Over the past year, the subject of fossil fuel pipelines has reached a high point of saturation in the national consciousness. While the nation watched major milestones unfold around the rejection of Keystone XL by President Obama, and Standing Rock's struggle to protect water against the Dakota Access Pipeline in North Dakota, resistance to pipelines in Virginia has been building as well. Residents and landowners in mostly rural parts of the state have taken on an uphill battle to try and stop two high-pressure natural gas pipelines from going through their land, as well as some of Virginia's most treasured places. Featuring the voices of those directly affected by the proposed infrastructure, this ongoing series will examine every aspect of the local pipeline struggle, episode by episode, starting at the very beginning and working our way to the present. Through voices of those on the front lines, we will touch on issues such as eminent domain, energy policy, industry influence on local politics, environmental impacts, and the mental health aspect of how residents are coping with this tremendous burden. Our goals are to provide listeners with the stories of Virginians who have been and are currently resisting both proposed natural gas pipelines and build a wider audience of people throughout our region who may not be familiar with all that has occurred since the summer of 2014, when the pipelines were first introduced. The built-in question we will be posing to listeners is the same many landowners are facing. Are these pipelines a done deal? To that end, as our episodes begin to meet up in real time with the decision-making processes at state and federal levels, End of the Line will continue to report on developments as the pipeline saga unfolds. We will announce a website for this project as soon as we know, and keep your eyes on End of the Line podcast.
Cause we don't want nothing at all, except for maybe some more of us down here tucked tight, just as ready to pound as we are ready to fight. And we don't want none of that. We ain't even looking at y'all. Nah, I'm looking through dirty lenses, but so happy to be alive. That death thinks I would ruin the vibe. I'm not invited, I'm not crying, calling out crimes, acting it kind, not blindly. Just looking for alignment, read what's under the bed. The last threads, unrest in the flesh and restless. Can't choose to stop us with some bad news maracas. What's the law but a leash? Can't lock, got tools to pop those reckless. And just out of your reach, happy underneath, mock fools and rock shows checklist. Treat them how they treat, goonish with the newest set of rules and the sharpest set of teeth. I'm aligned with the eyes on the meat, try to find any y'all, highly motivated y'all, you can hear it in the speech. Alright, motherfucker, see I was born like this, pissed with a twist, raised in the Midwest, where they hate with a grin, came of age, thicker skin, no contest, bigger smile on my off, didn't get into win cause I don't respect the game. I got up with all my friends and picked a repellent name. I constantly recommend a little bit of disdain, a little bit of resistance. They can hang, I was a new jack, trying to decide where I fit, I got busy. I destroy the walls how I live, yeah. And they ain't got the balls or the ovaries to get a fucking grip. So content to let it slip, hell-bent, none held in. They story full of holes, some of y'all fell in. How could I possibly offer up anything except a cent? Get on the fucking bus. I'm trying to show them all that we can't be touched. We too out of hand and we move too much. And we can take all that pressure, cause we don't want nothing at all. Except for maybe some more of us, all here tucked tight, just as ready to pound as we are ready to fight. Yeah, we don't want none of that, and we ain't even looking at y'all. There's a lot of fucking pressure. Particular road, ain't no particular mission. Only impossible goals, only defy definition. They only temperature cold, probably cause they only listen to everything that they told. We critical, kicking thermometers it's hot, we don't stay down. We'll keep watch, we risk getting caught. Better when running ready or not, it's all playground. It don't stop, we risk getting caught. Better when running ready or not.
Try to show them all that we can't be touched. We too out of hand and we move too much. And we can take all the pressure, cause we don't want nothing at all.
It's maybe some more of us. Yeah, so where you at? Mixed in lock picks, knives, bricks, and bats.
And we can take all the pressure, and we ain't even looking at y'all.
You're listening to WSFM LP 103.3 in Asheville, North Carolina. This is The Final Straw, and I'm Versa Goodness. This show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you're interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment, you're free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw, care of Asheville FM, 864 Haywood Road, Asheville, North Carolina, 28806. The show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop. If you're listening live, stay tuned for Wordplay with Jeff and Lockie for adventures in prose and the arts and all that good artsy art stuff. Conversationally proposed and promoted and presented prose-wise, mostly. It's good.
Stay at the corner. She is a living in an out of a tune.